All right, good afternoon, everyone.
We don't.
Welcome to the Natural Resource Committee. Just remind everyone, this is not our usual hearing room, so if you're here for the hearing other than natural resource, you're probably going to be either across the hall or down the hall. This is for Natural Resource Committee hearings this afternoon. I am Senator Bruce Bostelman from Brainerd, representing District 23, and I serve as chair of the committee. The committee will take up the bills in the order posted. This public hearing today is your opportunity to be a part of the legislative process and to express your position on the proposed legislation before us. If you are planning to testify today, please fill out one of the green testifier sheets that are on the table at the back of the room. Be sure to print clearly and fill it out completely. When it is your turn to come forward to testify, give the testifier sheet to the page or to the committee clerk. If you do not wish to testify, but would like to indicate your position on a bill, there are also white sign-in sheets back on the table. These sheets will be included as an exhibit in the official hearing record. When you come up to testify, please speak clearly into the microphone, tell us your name, and spell your first and last name to ensure we get an accurate record. We will begin each bill hearing today with the introducer's opening statement, followed by proponents of the bill, then opponents, and finally anyone speaking in the neutral capacity. We will finish with a closing statement by the introducer if they wish to give one. We will be using a 5-minute light system for all testifiers. When you begin your testimony, the light on the table will be green. When the yellow light comes on, you have 1 minute remaining, and the red light indicates you will need to wrap up your final thought and stop. Questions from the committee may follow. Also, committee members may come and go during the hearing. This has nothing to do with the importance of the bills being heard. It is just part of the process. The senators may have bills to introduce in other committees. Few final items to facilitate today's hearings. If you have handouts or copies of your testimony, please bring up at least 10 copies and give them to the page. Please silence or turn off your cell phones. Verbal outbursts or applause are not permitted in the hearing room. Such behavior may be cause for you to be asked to leave the hearing. Finally, committee procedures for all committees states that written position letters to be introduced or included in the record must be submitted by noon the last business day before the scheduled hearing on that particular bill. The only acceptable method of submission is via the legislature's website at nebraskalegislature.gov. You may submit a written letter for the record or testify in person at the hearing, not both. Written position letters will be included in the official hearing record, but only those testifying in person before the committee will be included on the committee statement. I will now have the committee members with us today introduce themselves, starting on my far right.
Thank you, Chairman Bostelman. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Jacobson, representing District 42. I represent Hooker, Thomas, McPherson, Logan, Lincoln, and 3/4 of Perkins County.
I'm Senator Tom Brandt, District 32, Fillmore Thayer, Jefferson, Saline, and southwestern Lancaster counties.
Jana Hughes, District 24, Seward, York, Polk, and a little bit of Butler County.
John Cavanaugh, District 9, Midtown Omaha.
Mike Moser, District 22, it's Platte County and most of Stanton County.
My far left.
John Frederickson, District 20, Central West Omaha.
Julie Slama, District 1, Otoe-Nemaha, Pawnee, Richardson, and Johnson counties.
Sir Moser also serves as the vice chair of the committee. Also assisting the committee today, to my left is our legal counsel, Cindy Lamb, and to my far left is our committee clerk, Lori Fullerton. Our pages for this afternoon are Trent Gadavi and Landon Sunday. Thank you both for being here this afternoon. With that, we'll begin today's hearing with LB 292.
Good afternoon, Senators.
Good afternoon. Thank you for being here and introducing for Senator Cavanaugh.
I am. Senator Bostelman and members of the Natural Resources Committee, I'm the legislative aide to Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, who represents District 6 in West Central Omaha. My name is Margaret Buck, M-A-R-G-A-R-E-T, B-U-C-K. I'm here to introduce LB 292 because, as many of you, she has multiple commitments in other committees. LB 292 proposes to prohibit the use of eminent domain in the Lower Platte River Lake Development Area. For those of you who are not in that debate last year and the year before, I'll briefly mention the bills that authorized all of this. The State Tourism and Recreational Water Access and Resource Sustainability, or Star Wars, Special Committee of the Legislature was created by LB 406 in 2021. In 2022, LB 1023 authorized several projects recommended by the Star Wars Committee. One of these projects is called the Lower Platte River Lake Development Project. The purpose of this project is to construct a combined reservoir and lake within the floodplain of the Platte River. The statement of intent for LB 1023 stated that the lake will be a 4,000-acre lake that will provide unprecedented new development and recreational opportunities, as well as enhancing flood control and water quality in the area. The bill authorizes the Department of Natural Resources to administer the Lower Platte River Lake Development Project. During that debate, former Senator Mike Hilgers repeatedly stated that there would be no use of eminent domain in the development project. Landowners from that area near the Platte River around Ashland were calling senators' offices wanting assurances that they would not be forced off their family land. So Senator Cavanaugh talked with Senator Hilgers and filed an amendment to the bill in debate to prohibit the use of eminent domain, but time ran out and debate on the bill ended before the pending amendment was considered. The use of eminent domain has been a contentious issue since the beginning of our country and remains contentious today, especially when the purpose is for developers to build million-dollar homes and displace current family farms. Senator Cavanaugh urges you to protect those families in that area and prohibit the use of eminent domain. That's all I got.
Thank you for the opening. I appreciate that. As it's a staff member that does, we do not ask questions and will not be a closing. So with that, I would ask anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for LB 292 to please step forward. Any proponents, someone in support? Good afternoon and welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Bosselman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. I'm Melissa Kierleber, MELISSA-KEIERLEBER. I'm here representing my family that has been farming near Gretna for almost 100 years, and we will be severely impacted by the state's desire to build a recreational lake. My family's farming operation has been under the threat of eminent domain 2 other times, and when you are farming in bottom ground, the price you receive is neither just nor fair. I am here today to testify in support of LB 292. I agree there should not be eminent domain in what is now called the Jedi Bill. I believe this bill needs to come out of committee to allow the legislative body a chance to vote on whether or not eminent domain can be used to potentially grab thousands of privately owned acres for a recreational lake. Now, last session, former Speaker Hilgers stated many times over that his desire is that any land acquisitions would not use eminent domain, but would use arm's length transactions. And by definition, an arm's length transaction is a business deal in which buyers and sellers act independently without one party influencing the other. However, right off, the state has undue pressure. They have the ability to use eminent domain. Take our price. We don't want to use eminent domain, but we will if we have to. If we take a look back at where this project started with LB 406, it started in the wake of the 2019 floods. The stated intent of 406 was to come up with 3 to 5 potential flood control infrastructure projects along the river basin of the Platte. 406 passed and the state was given $2 million that HDR won the bid to use. However, once LB 1023 came up last session, it had 4 recreational projects in it, and the biggest was a sandpit lake that aims to remove almost 200 million cubic yards of dirt that is 30 feet deep over 4,000 acres. LB 1023 still states the primary purpose is flood control. However, we were unable to see the results of that HDR study showing exactly how much flood control. Additionally, everyone in the state was told, even after a map of the site was released, that they still had no idea where the lake would actually be. So after the passage of 1023, the state was given another $20 million, and then the HDR study was released. What did it show? It did not show any alternate sites. It shows a singular location right outside of Gretna, our family's farm. It also shows essentially no flood control. The study states that there is a less than 5% flood control benefit. However, John Engel of HDR stated to a group of landowners that it was really less than 1%. The objective is to use this sand pit lake as off-channel storage. This is an exceptionally bad idea, as it will allow toxic water, garbage, dead animals, and sand to fill the lake. It will be a continual money pit for the state to clean up. There are 21 other sites that are mentioned in the study as reservoirs that do achieve a much greater measure of flood control and water sustainability and wouldn't potentially mess with MUD and Lincoln water. They wouldn't have to move thousands of acres of dirt, but none of these sites are being pursued for this project. Why? Those sites also wouldn't have half of the problems that this site has: an interstate, high voltage power lines, drainage ditches. There's also a highway, railroad, and transcontinental fiber optic cable that run right through the middle of it, just to mention a few. I think this project is far from its original goal of flood control, but more important than that, it is having the state doing the bidding of private corporations and developers that want to grab this site because they want to make money off of it. And the state now sees it as jobs and economic development, not to mention a perpetual incoming stream of tax revenue for the state. Now, I believe the purpose of government is to protect its citizens from entities larger than the individual, whether that be another country, large corporation, or even the state itself. If the state is going to be in the business of building recreational lakes, then it also needs to protect citizens from government overreach. If the state is going to be run like a business, like former Governor Ricketts regularly states, then businesses don't have the use of eminent domain to grab land that they want to use for private development. I greatly appreciate your time here today, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Great, thank you for your testimony. Other questions from committee members? Senator Jacobson.
Thank you, Senator Bostelman. I guess my biggest concern, I sat through the debate on this project and I heard that certainly was the preference of Senator Hilgers, but I don't think I ever heard any guarantees that eminent domain would not be used. And I would just tell you from a practical matter, I'm a landowner, a farm landowner. I get the concern with eminent domain. I have concerns if it were being imposed upon me. I wouldn't like it either. But I think from a practical standpoint, you could find willing sellers all around. But if you got 2 or 3 pieces that are left and you can't get the sellers to agree, and this is a huge project that has a public benefit, which this would have, I don't know how you get it done without eminent domain. I think there could be, as I understand it, there was an interest in paying a premium price to get the land that might be necessary for this project. I just fundamentally have concerns that we can't just go out and pick and choose eminent domain. So how would we do this as it relates to other projects if we carve this one out? How would we be consistent in the future?
Well, I don't think my aim necessarily is to look at other locations. I think that's probably the state, but they should probably be places that achieve the goal that they were looking at for flood control, which this definitely doesn't. But I think in our county that we can see, like Facebook came in and they had a lot of acres that they were going after, and they knocked on doors and wrote checks. And if people didn't want to sell, they had to go around them. And I think they've gotten a lot of that since then. But there's been large corporations here that have successfully gotten large chunks of land without the use of eminent domain or using the state to do the bidding for them.
So you're thinking a project this size could all be done without use of eminent domain?
Facebook successfully did it. I think there's
Well, they
also
didn't
places
get
that
this
are.
big a site though, did they? I mean, isn't this a much bigger site?
Well, there are places that the state could have looked at that the state owns as well. And
And
that
I'm
was-
just saying, I'm just asking more as a matter of eminent domain use, is that I'm just concerned that how would this be separate than anything else that might be done with eminent domain? That's where my concerns would come, and it just seems, you have other solutions then?
Well, I think the bill is very specific to just this project.
I get that. Yeah.
So
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think you told me what I needed to know. Thank you.
Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for your testimony. So how many acres of your farm would be affected by this?
We're just a little bit north of 600 acres.
And I'm a farmer also, and I think it's just inherent in a farmer that we just don't like people telling us what to do.
Taking the land.
Yeah, they're taking the land. But I kind of agree with what you said. I mean, as opposed to the eminent domain, what as long as they paid you too much, you would probably be open-minded to trading land or something like that, would you not? Or, I mean, you're just absolutely a hard no.
I would not say that like we're a hard no, but we know what eminent domain is. Like I said, we've experienced it twice before. And when you're in the bottom ground, that price, it isn't based upon what this site would potentially be. And we can't change what our land is valued as, to say it's like developmental land or something, which is what they're going to do to it. So in the bottom ground where it's in a flood way, they get to take it for, pennies on the dollar, so to speak.
And I agree with you. They shouldn't be able to do that,
Yes.
okay? And they have every right to come in and pay way too much for it. This is how I look at the world.
Right.
And usually they use this right of eminent domain and hang it over that seller's head because they don't want to do that. But I mean, that option is always out there too. So thank you for your testimony.
Other questions from committee members? Councilor Mosher.
Have you heard any indication that the state plans to use eminent domain to buy this land?
Yes, Senator McDonald stood in front of a meeting room of about probably 75 people and said that he wasn't going to BS us. He was willing to use eminent domain for this. So that was our first.
This is lately, or?
That was right when this came out for, when we first found out about, we didn't find out about it from the state.
Before Hilger said that it wasn't going to use eminent domain.
This was at the introduction of 1023. This was actually after, I think the first meeting was after it passed. So yeah, that would be after it passed, I would say.
Thank you.
Sir Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosman. Thank you for being here. You mentioned that this same land has been under threat of eminent domain before, or has eminent domain been used?
Eminent domain's been used against our family.
And do you know what the projects were?
Well, the one that's closest to us is right in between the rivers. It's right in between the Elkhorn and the Platte. And it wasn't extremely profitable, farm ground because there's a lot of sand there because it's been flooded. And so my grandfather was looking to sell those acres to somebody who wanted to use it for hunting and, recreating, so to speak. And as soon as he put it up for sale, the state stepped in and said that they wanted to protect sturgeon and piping plovers, I think like killdeer, things of that nature. And so even though it was assessed at double what they gave them and the person that was looking to purchase it was going to pay even more than that, the state paid half of what it was assessed at. So it's, again, when you're in a floodplain, and then that land has been flooded obviously several times, and the purpose that they used it for, they dug some channels through there, and they dug it out once, I believe, and now this last time they just left it as is. So the thing that they were intent for using it for, the sturgeon to pass through, it's not even being used for.
Okay. And you said 2 times? Was there a
The
specific?
second was the Oahe Dam up in South Dakota. So that was a reservoir that they were putting a dam in for the Missouri. And it's yet again another instance of we've experienced flooding along the Missouri. Everyone in Nebraska knows about that. And they keep too much water in the reservoirs. And then I think they had a successful class action lawsuit saying you guys have held too much water in these dams for recreating. And so they still don't use them for necessarily the purpose that they're supposed to be used for when its recreation is attached to it.
Thank you.
Other questions? Sir Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Boston. Thank you for being here and for testifying. So one of the things that you talked about, and if you're not the person to answer this, maybe let me know, but you spoke about the flood control benefit specifically. And so can you kind of, in what I'm reading here is you said only 5% flood control benefit. Was your understanding of what was the project intended to do more than that, or what's your?
Well, I think originally when this was discussed, Senator Clements spoke with me that Senator Bosselman and himself were very concerned about them damming the Platte because Senator McDonald was talking about that in the wake of the 2019 floods. So it was added to there that there will be no damming of the Platte. So it's going to be a reservoir that would sit to the side essentially of the Elkhorn and Platte River. And if you know anything about the lakes down there, the lakes essentially sit at the same level as the rivers do. And so the amount of storage that there would be like the difference between the top of the lake and like surface tension. There wouldn't be much. So when HDR did the study, they show a graph of a potential of a singular lake system or a dual lake system, and then what happened in 2019. And if you look at the graphs, that would be the proportion where it's less than 1%. They literally sit on top of each other. There is no difference. A flooding, when it happens down there, it happens because of ice jamming. And where the levees break, it breaks. And water will pour in wherever it wants to go in, and there will no longer be land there to stop it. So it will cut through there, and then it'll cut out somewhere on the south side, unless they talked about putting, I think, gates to open on the south end. So it doesn't really do much.
Right.
By their own admission.
Yeah. Thank you.
See no other questions? Thank you for being here today. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent for LB 292.
Hi, Senators. My name is Gerald Vinduska, Jarel. Vinduska is Vinduska. I would like to thank Senator Cavanaugh for bringing this bill forward. Our farm is not in this project area. It's downstream in the Platte Valley ways. But the reason I came here today is I feel like if anybody's property rights are trampled upon, we all have the chance of losing someday. And it's just not right to have that in our country. I mean, eminent domain has been abused way too often. I mean, it was, you know what it was originally meant for was highways and things that we wouldn't have as a society unless we had that ability. But when you transfer over to recreation so that somebody can, build fancy houses around it, that should never be allowed. And but to answer your question, Senator Jacobson, how would you do this? Well, as far as I'm concerned, the way it's being proposed is just incredibly stupid and costly. Just think how much, even at today's land prices, how much is going to be spent just for the study of this lake. I know you appropriated, what was it, 20 million, but part of that's for a couple other projects, but even maybe 10 million is going to be studied, and maybe more by the time you're done. I don't know what the exact figure, but even at today's land prices, just think how much land, a pretty good chunk of land you could buy for $10 million or more. And then what you could do is lease it out to a gravel pumper, and instead of costing money to pump to get the reservoir, you're getting paid royalties for the gravel. Because did you ever stop and think, like, I'm an excavator, and maybe you people can't picture this, but on 4,000 acres, if you peel out 30 feet, you could build a ski resort in Nebraska. That's such an immense amount of material. It's just beyond mind-boggling how much you'd have to move and the cost of that. Whereas, like I say, if you pumped out a place, got paid for the gravel royalties, and sure, it would take more time to get done, but you'd be making money for the state instead of spending it. And then by the time you pumped out one spot, surely there would be some other willing seller. People are getting older, they're retiring, and if you're paid a fair price, they'd sell it. So you moved that one, and you just keep working your way up the valley, and you'll have a nice lake. And but what annoys me the most is where they try to pretend eminent domain is justified for flood control. This is just the opposite of flood control. Since the lake will match the river, a level of the river, there's no storage area as a result of that. And actually, like the previous testifier said, when the dike breaks during these bad flood events, the floodplain is where the water is stored then. Well, now what happens, like on our farm, if I want to put a fence post in the floodplain, I'd have to hire a professional engineer to give a no-rise certificate that shows that fence post isn't going to impede the net rise of the river. And even though there's a cottonwood forest of mature trees all the way up and down the river. But I still have to prove that and expend that there's not going to be no net rise. But here, you take 4,000 acres out of the floodplain that would have stored water if the dike broke. Now, you build big dikes around it, it's excluded. So are you going to say there's no net rise to the flood elevation? The people downstream are going to have a bigger net rise. And so I guess what it boils down to, I've spent my adult life, fixing up the farm, planting trees, putting conservation work in, making wildlife habitat, planting prairies and stuff like that. And it just scares the heck out of me that after a lifetime worth of work, some government agency could come in and say, oh, we're taking this, we're going to make a hole in the ground. And it just frightening. I don't know if you're to somebody that isn't a landowner, maybe you don't have that feeling, but it's just scary beyond belief. And I can really sympathize with these people that have been several generations on the same land, and it just isn't right. So I hope you'll do your best to make sure this passes and put a stop end to this nonsense. Any questions?
Okay, any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for coming in. Next proponent, please, for LB 294. Good afternoon.
Hello, my name is Jody O'Brien, Jodiobrien. And thank you, Chairman Bosman, for allowing me to come and the committee for allowing me to come. I don't do this regularly, just so you know. I'm testifying on behalf of my father, Joseph Kojal, myself, and my family who reside where the Big Lake development is being proposed. I would like to start off, if I could, just by asking some questions to y'all. How would you feel if you spent 84 years on a piece of property that you love, sacrificed to buy, and then the government wants to come in and take it so that real estate developers can become rich and sell it for profit? How would you feel if you raised your family on a piece of property everyone calls a little slice of heaven, and the government wants to take it so that real estate developers can become rich and sell it for profit? How would you feel if your farm ground, horse barns, house, lake, hunting ground, fishing area, an entire family who reside on the property had to leave so that real estate developers can become rich and sell it for profit? How would you feel if your legacy would be destroyed and all the memories gone, only that so that real estate developers can become rich and sell it for profit? And finally, how would you feel if you already went through 3 separate expensive court trials to save your property from eminent domain and lost? Then to find out the government is farming your property and making profit off it. This happened to my father, and now it's likely to happen again. Why? How does this happen to everyday hardworking people? All my father and my family ask is for you to put yourself in our shoes. How would you feel? Since we heard about this project, I have been trying to find out more information and have been very unsuccessful. If it were not for the media, I would not have learned about this project. It seems that the only other information I receive is from digging deep, asking a lot of questions, and researching. At no time have I or any landowners around me received notification by mail, phone, or public announcement. I ask why. However, as mentioned in the article by the Nebraska Examiner, Metro Omaha Builders Association, MOBA, was presented with a PowerPoint presentation by one state senator. Why? In the article, as Ryan Krejci, MOBA board member, said, quote, "Put water anywhere in a house next to it, it's good as gold," end quote. It sounds as if this project is for the rich and not the little guy. Take from the little guy to empower the rich. Media investors are already on board making comments and articles about luxury houses, etc. Why are all the landowners who are potentially facing eminent domain not afforded the same time and consideration as the wealthy developers? So the question arises, has there already been private arrangements or discussions between government officials and the current landowners and developers? What authority does a state senator representing a district not in the Big Lake project area have presenting real estate to real estate developers? What information has the state senator provided from the HDR assessment to Metro Omaha Building Association and others that the general public have not had privy to? I have to be honest, the last thing I ever wanted to do was come here before the committee. I'm not a public speaker. I'm a little bit nervous, as you can probably tell. But I felt I needed to come and share my 84-year-old father and family's concerns with you. This project is not about society needing water or any other necessity for survival. We have been a victim of eminent domain in the past and don't want to lose what is left of our property that we maintained and improved over the last 8 decades with our sweat, blood, and tears. What harm is there to have the legislature debate on the floor in regard to this? Thank you so much.
Thank you, and you did fine on your
Okay.
testimony. That was, you did a good job, so, thank you. Any questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you very much. Thank you for coming in. Next, proponent for LB 292. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon again. This is a big day for me. I'm here for all your bills. So, Al Davis, representing the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club, ALDAVIS. And as you know, there are 3,000 members. I'm not going to read my testimony to you this afternoon because you'll have copies of it. But I think the people who spoke ahead of me did an eloquent job of explaining the primary reasons that the Sierra Club opposes this. First of all, I just will say this, the scope of the project is immense. And if you think about what this amounts to in terms of the soil that you're going to be removing, and you heard that referred to earlier, it's about 6 miles by 4.25 miles. So you're taking out soil to a depth of 30 feet in that size. So if that's not hauled away, it's going to have to be piled somewhere. Pile it on top of the ground there and you build homes on it or something, you end up exacerbating the flood risk rather than mitigating it. So if this has been touted as a flood control project, I think it's a huge failure. We all know that most of the argument behind this lake is we need recreational activities. And that it's going to help it keep our young people in the state of Nebraska. I just don't buy that argument. I never have. I think young people want to have good jobs. That's the main thing they want to do. And they want to have opportunities to engage with their cohorts. Getting to the last part of this, people who own this property have worked hard to keep it all these years and they've kept it up. They've done a good job managing their farm. Using eminent domain for a public benefit that isn't really so public, but is really more towards enriching other people is just improper and immoral in my opinion, and in the opinion of the Sierra Club. The last thing I'm going to say is there are a lot of good habitat situations in that area because of the closeness to the rivers. We heard earlier talk about why we need to work on habitat. So let's not tear up more habitat to build mansions and roads. Let's have some natural places remain natural. Thanks to Senator Cavanaugh for introducing this bill. We fully support it, and I understand that the state does not have that authority now. I hope that you will work hard as senators to maintain that. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Other questions from committee members? Sir Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosman. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for being here. Different Senator Cavanaugh, for the record. So we heard, folks, and you just kind of addressed it, that it'll exacerbate the flood control basically based on how you do this. And do you think that the project, as you said, people want this project because of the recreation aspects, but there's some playing up of the flood control aspects of it. This, I have not heard this 5% or even 1% flood control aspect before, to bolster the case for utilization of eminent domain.
I think it does bolster the case. I think it's hard to justify a project for recreational purposes strictly. If you can say if there are other, we're going to contribute other
public benefits.
Public benefits. I'm sorry. There you go. It certainly raises the quality of the project, which I think brings more people into thinking we need eminent domain to get it completed.
Well, the important people in the eminent domain aspect would be the courts who would be granting the eminent domain
Correct.
if somebody objects to it, right?
Correct.
And so,
But the state does, at the present time, the state does not have authority to use eminent domain. on this project.
in this project. And why do you say that?
I heard it from your chairman this morning.
Okay. I must have missed that part this morning.
I think you were out of the room.
I was out there. Thank you, Mr. Davis.
Sir Moser.
I wouldn't assume that. One person's offhand remark about what they intend to do may or may not be binding on the state. And, this project came up numerous times in the past. They were going to dam up the Platte. And the problem hydrologically with damming up the Platte is that it's such a wide valley and there's so little difference in the elevation. So you would have to have an enormously long dike to collect any water, and then your depth of water would be so shallow that you'd have a bog. And, I live just off to the side of the Loup River, and then a few more miles south is the Platte River. And we've had numerous ice jams where the two rivers actually flowed together and went to the east. And so, I've lived, well, one day I couldn't get here. I drove through water in North Bend, and the state patrolman said I had to go back. And I said, well, you can't stop me if I want to drive to Lincoln. He says, if you insist on driving ahead, he says, I want your next of kin and your phone number. Because he said, you're going to be bobbing down the river toward Omaha. And, those natural forces are hard to contend with. But I wouldn't assume, maybe that's correct that the state can't use eminent domain, but eminent domain is nasty. It's a
Well, then
nasty,
that's one more reason why this bill
contentious.
should be passed. If that's the case, because I think it's just a bad project, always has been a bad project. The discussion about the damming up the Platte was kind of a pipe dream that didn't make a bit of sense. So the originators of this idea said, well, now we can maybe do something here. But the displacement of the amount of soil is massive. It's just a huge amount of soil that's going to be moved. And if it's not hauled away, you're going to create slopes and runoff and exacerbate the problems.
I would assume that they'd want to raise the elevation a little bit so that if there is a flood, that their houses aren't going to be flooded.
So, I have a sister-in-law who has a cabin at Horseshoe Lake, which is basically right on the Platte, but it's all, it's a little horseshoe bend. And when that flooded in 2019, the water came up, 6 feet into the house. So it can be a bad thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Next proponent for LB 292.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. For the record, my name is John Hanson, John Hanson, Hansan. I'm the president of Nebraska Farmers Union. In my former life, I was also on the Lower Elkhart NRD board from 1974 to 1990. Our NRD was involved in the building of the largest multi-purpose structure in the state. And I think it's maybe a bit instructive when we're talking about eminent domain to revisit just how it is we got to that point and how that worked out. But game and parks used to have the power of eminent domain. And they used it and they abused it and they lost it because of the enormous amount of pushback from landowners and the public, and rightly so. So along comes the NRDs, authorized in 72, fully operational in 74. And so they were given eminent domain authority for flood control projects. And so then as time went on, if you could do a flood control project, that was good, but what about a multi-purpose project? So if you could do a multi-purpose project, well, wouldn't that still be a good justification of eminent domain? Well, yes. And so NRDs then got the power of eminent domain for multi-purpose projects without any sideboards or guidance. So at what point does a multi-purpose project cease being a multi-purpose project and should really be categorized as a single-purpose project. So that was the issue that I raised as a board member of the Lower Elkhorn NRD, because that Willow Creek project, which is, I believe, still the largest project of its kind, it's either first or second, depending on how you measure surface area relative to the Wannahoo project at Wahoo, was, according to the data that we had from the consultants that we hired, was 96% recreation, 4% flood control. But that 4% flood control really helped sell the project. So how did this work relative to landowners? Well, when you go to a landowner and you say, this is willing buyer, willing seller, except that I have eminent domain in my pocket. And if you don't sell it to us on a willing basis, we'll use eminent domain. Whoever it is that is doing that has an inherent advantage. So when I get calls from landowners in this particular project area, and this is kind of, I've worked in this area for a very long time, and I make all the phone calls to the folks that I think I ought to call, and I can't find anybody, any entity that in this state, that in this situation, on this project, has eminent domain authority that could be used. So that's my opinion. I think that you can't use eminent domain because I don't think there's any entity that qualifies for it. And if you take the NRDs out, then there is none. Well, when I'm getting calls from landowners and they're getting different signals from reading the press, but also talking to public officials, and the hint is there that eminent domain could be used, that really colors the consideration. So what I think the honorable and the straight up thing to do in this particular case is to support this bill. And if we're not going to use eminent domain, let's be straight up with the landowners and make it clear to them that we're not going to be using eminent domain, and it's going to be an arm's length, willing buyer, willing seller relationship. And if they want to, if they are compensated at a point that they're finally willing to sell, you have a project. And if they're not, we don't, and we shouldn't. Because in my opinion, eminent domain should not be used in this particular project because in my opinion, it has virtually no flood control benefit and is not an appropriate use of eminent domain. So let's just be straight up with landowners. Let's do the straight up thing and let's send a clear signal. And so I appreciate Senator Michaela Cavanaugh bringing this bill. And I think that this would help clear up the state's intent. And if it is in fact our intent not to use eminent domain, let's make that clear enough that everybody involved understands it. With that, I'd be glad to end my testimony and answer any questions if I could.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Sir Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bossman. Thank you, Mr. Hanson, for being here. So just to put a point on it, this is just a cleanup bill.
If in fact the state was not intending to use eminent domain, it would be a cleanup bill.
If only the state were only one person, I guess. There's a few interests.
Sarah Mosher.
You don't think that the state has a legitimate reason to use eminent domain on this project?
Not for a single purpose recreation project with developmental economic benefits. I don't think that that is an appropriate use of eminent domain. But of course, I represent landowners as an organization.
Are you an attorney?
I am not. I'm the president of a general farm organization with over 3,000 members, and eminent domain, if you want to start a conversation that quickly escalates my organization, talking about using the speculative power of eminent domain to take their land for whatever purpose.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question. You know, what purposes the state can use eminent domain for. And typically the state or the governmental body will take possession of the land. And then in the eminent domain proceedings, they later decide how much they have to pay for it. But basically they get to use it, and the amount that you get is settled later. Because we had numerous eminent domain actions when we built a road And we built the road and they settled all those cases later. It's a nasty business.
Well, it's a nasty business, in my opinion. It's such a powerful tool that it needs to be done in a very careful and carefully described and prescribed kind of way.
It's
And
kind
it
of
meets certain kinds of conditions, and that the rules of the road are very clear.
it's kind of a nuclear force tool.
Yeah, it's certainly, yeah. From a landowner's perspective, it certainly is, because it completely changes the nature of the arm's length negotiation. And we found the very same thing on the pipeline issue. And so we were front and center in the middle of the pipeline issue. So it's when people have that power and that authority, it's so powerful, they're going to use it to negotiate their interests. So,
Okay.
you know, we had
Thank-
that whole discussion.
Yeah, thank you very much. I don't want
Yep,
to get you
yep.
all worked up here.
I only have about 6 hours worth of eminent domain discussion on that topic, Senator.
So part of the discussion we had after a morning session, I think Mr. Davis talked about as we discussed this, and the thing was, as I were talking, I didn't know in statute, like what you're saying, that eminent domain would apply, but I'm interested in learning once we have the hearing, is there someplace in statute that this would, where eminent domain would apply? I just didn't know at the time that there was such a application for it. Would you agree? I mean, with not with the discussion that we had.
Yeah, going through the list of entities who could use the power of eminent domain, and I couldn't think of any state agency that would necessarily have the power. The one that would come to my mind that would be the most logical would be the NRD, and that one has already been set aside. So then if there was a threat of using eminent domain, I don't know who it is that would do it. But Senator, I've learned a long time ago to always factor in the very strong possibility in my case that I could be wrong. But I don't know what entity that would be, but if that is in fact the case, then I think that there is merit in making that clear.
Right. I would, I guess the comment that I have is that we had a similar discussion, was we just didn't know where in statute specifically this would be interested in the hearing this afternoon to understand more about where that might apply and try to find in statute, if it does, eminent domain could apply, where that would be. And that was kind of the framework of our discussion. So thank you. Thank you for your
Thank
testimony.
you.
Next proponent then. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bostelman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Kenneth Winston, Kenneth, Winston. I'm appearing on behalf of the Bold Alliance in support of LB 292. And you've heard good testimony from a lot of people on a number of different issues. Bold Alliance basically supports this because we're supporters of protection of private property rights guaranteed by the Constitution of the United States and the Nebraska Constitution. And we're supporting this bill in particular because it protects private property against the use of eminent domain for private gain. And although I'm going to join in the parade of people who think that it may be already prohibited by current law, and I am an attorney, we believe that it's important to spell it out so there is a clear statement of policy to protect landowners and guide public entities engaged in this project. I'd be glad to respond to questions.
Any questions? Senator Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Winston. So we've heard from a few folks saying that there are people out there saying they're going to use eminent domain for this, right?
Well, that's what I heard.
You sat here and you heard that.
To that
and
effect. Yes.
It's your opinion and the opinion of a number of other people that we didn't explicitly give the lake authority the ability to use eminent domain. when we passed, I can't remember the number of the bill last year, 1066 or something like that, or I don't know.
1023?
1023. Yes, you're right.
1024.
Or is it 1024?
23.
I think 24 is the canal, but either way, this is my question. So I guess I have a two-part question. One is, there are entities that have jurisdiction over this, like Mr. Hansen talked about, like the NRD, that could potentially be used as a vehicle. Say the county, I guess, is a potential entity that has power of eminent domain, that if they chose to get involved, could potentially exercise eminent domain. So that's one question. The other question is, isn't it good just to clarify that we're not going to use eminent domain for this, so people aren't getting misinformation as they're negotiating these willing buyer and willing seller conversations?
Yes, I would affirm what you just said. Yes, it would be good to have that clarified in statute so that people know, so that people can't be threatened with eminent domain, and so that people would understand that so you would have a willing buyer, willing seller relationship. So, yes.
And what about my other question about the other entities that could potentially use their eminent domain for purposes of the lake?
Well, I don't know which entities could potentially be used. There's some language in the bill that passed, it says, and it's actually in this language as well, that says it can't be annexed. Now, I don't know exactly what all that means, but I presume it means that no municipality could annex the property. So I guess the entities that come to mind would be potentially the state could be an entity that could use it. Potentially the county, potentially the NRD. Those would be the three that I could think of. However, I question whether any of them actually have that authority.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson.
Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you. And I'd be glad to follow up with you about the reasons for my theory. So.
Well, I could have asked a follow-up question. That's all right.
So, thank you. So,
Next proponent, please. Proponent for LB 292, please step forward. Any other proponents? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in opposition to LB 292? Anyone in opposition? Seeing none, anyone like to testify in the neutral capacity? Good afternoon.
Afternoon, Senator Bosman, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name's Dean Edson, DeanEdson, and I'm the Executive Director for the Nebraska Association of Resources Districts. And we're just here to testify in a neutral capacity. And I want to limit my comments. We're not taking any position on the lake project or anything else. But what caught our attention was the language in here to allow to prohibit political subdivisions from using eminent domain for this project. I'm here to dispel a rumor that we tried to get dismissed last year. The NRDs do not have the authority to use eminent domain for a state project. And so that rumor has been floating around last year. And I just want to end the discussion now and let you know that we don't have that authority. The other thing I want to point out is if there was any eminent domain authority extended to us, it would have been explicitly noted in the statute, and you could repeal it. And so since that authority wasn't granted to us, there's nothing to repeal. So the point is, I'm not sure if the language in there in reference to the political subdivisions is really necessary because it's no authority we have right now. So you're prohibiting an authority we don't have. So.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you, Executive Director Edson. But if this were an NRD project, you have the right of eminent domain.
Correct. And we have the right of eminent domain for NRD projects, and those are specifically spelled out of what those authorities are.
All right.
But this is a state project.
Right.
And so we do not have any authority to exercise any eminent domain on
on this specific project. But you have the right of eminent domain. Otherwise, in
yes.
the normal course of business.
Yes.
All right.
For our flood control structures, like previous testifier mentioned about structures that we build and maintain.
So just out of curiosity, so you have a multi-use structure that is maybe 10% flood control, 90% recreation. On an NRD sense, would you use the right of eminent domain in a situation like that?
Well, I'm not going to go into the percentages per se, because I don't know exactly what percent, getting into hypotheticals. What, if you're doing a multi-purpose structure, what you have to meet is the cost benefit ratios.
Mhm.
So the cost, the benefits that you're receiving out of the projects have to exceed the cost before the NRD moves forward on anything. Plus that requirements in state law for any state funds we may receive for a cost share for that type of project. So the percentages, I don't know. You have to run the cost benefit
All right.
first.
Thank you.
Sir Mosier.
Cost benefit to who?
The public.
Well, would you think that a big recreational lake would be a benefit to the public?
Well, you'd have to run your economic analysis on it. I'm not going to get into the one with this particular project. I think they're doing that now, they're trying to do some analysis on it, but that's at the state level. Again,
But the NRD couldn't be used. Is this in your NRD area?
well, I got the whole state. I got all 23
okay.
districts.
So,
This one.
but you
there's
couldn't
discussion.
be made the lead agency somehow,
No,
and they couldn't use you as a vehicle to get eminent domain
no,
to build that.
can't happen. Okay, let's follow through that just a little bit on the eminent domain procedures. Okay, so that money would all have to run through the NRD. So the NRD would have to have that money available to purchase this land. Okay, the amount, the size of the land you're buying here far exceeds any one individual NRD tenfold, and probably more. It's just way beyond our capacity to start with.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else like to testify in neutral capacity on LB 292? Anyone else want to testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, we did receive 4 proponent letters for the record, and this will conclude the hearing on LB 292. Thank you all for coming today. Next, we'll be opening in just a minute on LB 636. All right, our next bill is LB 636. Senator Albrecht, you're welcome to open on the bill.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bostelman and members of the Natural Resource Committee. For the record, my name is Joni Albrecht, Joni, Albrecht, Albrecht. And I represent District 17, which includes Dakota, Thurston, Wayne, and portions of Dixon counties in northeast Nebraska. I'm here today to introduce LB 636. How about that? LB 636, which provides a statewide approach to energy policy and would ensure governments do not restrict the fuel choice options of Nebraskans for their homes and businesses. LB 636 lists several energy choices, but is primarily driven by what we have seen local governments do across the country. Communities coast to coast and in between, in places like California, Colorado, New York, New Jersey, and even Kansas, are proposing ordinances that would seek to or even ban the use of natural gas equipment and connections in new buildings and construction. Banning natural gas would not only negatively impact local businesses, economic development, customers, and communities, it also threatens our resiliency. In response, more than 20 states have enacted energy choice legislation, with several more states considering such measures. This legislation has often received a bipartisan support. Banning natural gas in residential and commercial buildings would have a negative impact on the economy and is a costly, inefficient means to achieve desired climate goals. Nearly 540,000 Nebraskans rely on safe and reliable natural gas service. Eliminating their energy choices increases energy costs significantly and reduces discretionary spending. Bans can cost jobs in the industry that rely on affordable energy like agriculture and can hurt a community's competitiveness and can negatively impact the economy. Enactment of this bill would ensure current and future Nebraska businesses know that they are open for business. A decision to ban natural gas in one community has impacts on many Nebraskans. Utility regulation is a matter of statewide concern. Local decisions to ban natural gas pass costs onto other customers and create a patchwork energy policy. The state has a responsibility to ensure its citizens have access to affordable, reliable, and resilient energy mix. Local governments, in most cases, do not have to worry about the responsibility that comes with this authority. Limiting access to natural gas hurts economic development, job creation, and creates a barrier to solving the housing crisis. Local decisions to eliminate fuel choices have an impact on current and future citizens and residents in other jurisdictions. State policies are necessary to balance the needs and considerations of customers throughout Nebraska. I thank you for the opportunity to introduce LB 636, and I urge you to send LB 636 to the floor. Following me will be stakeholders who will be happy to answer the questions that you may have, and I'll certainly try to answer a few myself. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions from committee members? Senator Brandt.
Thank you, Chairman Bosselman. Thank you, Senator Albrecht, for bringing this bill. I'm just kind of curious why we just listed just the natural gas, because reading this, it almost appears we should have included nuclear and coal and wind power and hydro and solar and all 9 or 10 methane. Why didn't we include all of these into this? Because when you read that first part, I get the impression that it could cover those. Am I incorrect?
Well, it certainly could, and if you'd like to amend it, you'd probably have to give with the people who asked me to bring it, which were the natural gas folks.
Okay.
I brought it last year and we ran out of time, and they brought it back again this year, but I can definitely understand where you're coming from.
All right, thank you.
Other questions? Seeing none, will you stay for closing?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Invite anyone who'd like to testify as a proponent for LB 636 to please come forward. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Senator Bosselman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Jill Becker, spelled Jillbecker, and I am a registered lobbyist for Black Hills Energy. Today, I am representing not only Black Hills Energy, but also the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, the Lincoln Chamber of Commerce, Metropolitan Utilities District, the HBAL MOBA Coalition, and the Nebraska Economic Developers Association. And we would like to thank Senator Albrecht for introducing LB 636. Black Hills Energy is a natural gas utility proudly serving approximately 300,000 customers in 319 communities across Nebraska. In total, the Black Hills Energy family serves 1.3 million natural gas and electric customers in 8 states. Preserving energy choice is critical for Nebraskans. This bill protects that choice in state law, providing certainty for Nebraskans that natural gas remains a viable option in their homes and for their businesses. In response to action taken in other states, more than 20 states have enacted energy choice legislation, and this is modeled after what other states have done. This legislation supports the choice of consumers and leaves it up to them to decide which type of energy they want to use. Banning natural gas in Nebraska would not only negatively impact local businesses, it would also impact economic development, customers, and communities. It threatens energy reliability and resiliency. The natural gas industry as a whole and Nebraska providers of natural gas are committed to partnering with the communities that we serve to find sensible greenhouse gas reduction strategies. And we believe that natural gas is a critical piece of making that happen. Natural gas is a clean source of energy which has and will continue to reduce our country's carbon emissions. Through the use of new technology, renewable natural gas has increased energy efficiency and will continue to shrink our country's carbon footprint. When one considers the affordability and efficiency of natural gas with emerging natural gas appliances and renewable natural gas, it is clear that natural gas has to be a part of the discussion around reducing emissions. As was mentioned, 59% of Nebraska households use natural gas as their primary heating fuel. Eliminating their energy choice could increase their energy costs significantly and reduce discretionary spending. Households that use natural gas for heating, cooking, and drying clothes see an average savings of well over $800 a year. Eliminating natural gas as a choice impacts the pocketbooks of our customers. Homeowners would face the cost of retrofitting their home, electric panel upgrades, and appliance costs to replace their furnaces, hot water heaters, kitchen stoves, and dryers. Commercial and industrial businesses would also face increased costs and impacts to their operations. The energy required to fuel many business processes cannot be effectively met through electricity, and in addition to being cost prohibitive, is often not feasible through electric power. When communities consider bans like banning natural gas, that can cost jobs in industries that rely on affordable energy, like agriculture. It can hurt a community's competitiveness and can negatively impact the economy. Enactment of this bill would ensure current and future Nebraska businesses to know that we are open for business. Finally, local decisions to ban natural gas pass costs on to other customers and would create difficulty in ensuring that all customers have the necessary amount of energy that they use. Ultimately, it should be up to the customers and their own decisions to choose which energy source they want to use. I urge you to advance LB 636 to the floor, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for testimony. Questions from committee members? Sir Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chair Bossman. Thank you, Becker. Ms. Becker?
Yes.
Thank you for being here, Ms. Becker. So my reading of this is we're potentially banning cities or villages or whatever from imposing an ordinance that would prevent new construction that would have natural gas, or would I have to pull the natural gas pipes out of my house if Omaha did this?
Well, it would probably depend on what they would require. We have not typically seen that per se across the country, that you'd have to retrofit your home, but it is possible. It depends on how a city or a county would do an ordinance.
Okay.
So the language oftentimes only applies to new construction, but that is not always the case. So it could be requiring you retroactively to, remove your natural gas stove, remove your fireplace. Yes.
Can you give me examples of places that have required people to remove their natural gas stove?
I don't want to speak off the top of my head, so I would be happy to tell you if there have been any communities that have done that. But like I said, most of the times it is prospective.
Okay.
So applying to new construction.
But just to sort of, so this is about, the reason this bill doesn't include nuclear and that kind of stuff is because we're not piping nuclear into somebody's home. That would just be electricity that we're piping into the home, right?
Typically, yeah. I mean, where we have seen the attack, if you will, on the industry is natural gas. And so that's not to say there hasn't been an attack on neutral. It's just, I'm not involved in that attack. So we have seen states doing this. Yeah.
Nuclear, but I'm just trying to clarify
Yes.
Senator Brandt's question, why we're having this conversation about natural gas and not about these other sources of generation.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sorry, Hughes.
So just curiosity question. So I have been hearing some of the states are doing that in new construction. Who is so for getting rid? I mean, is it just all, you're breathing fumes and because I turn on my gas stove and it's going to kill my family? Is that like, who's against, like who's pushing these, I guess?
So I feel like that's a loaded question, Senator, so I will answer you as well as I can. The study that she mentioned got a lot of national attention, and it's wrong. There's no link. And so entities that are pushing it have an agenda to push it. It can be, like I said, reducing emissions, but we believe that that analysis is wrong and that there are benefits to using natural gas and helping communities continue to use natural gas and still meet their emissions. So, thank you.
Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Bossman. Thank you for being here for your testimony. So should this bill pass, this would in theory still, if a new developer, for example, in Omaha was putting in, was developing a condominium, they would still have the choice to determine what their fuel source would be. So
Absolutely.
If they were to choose
Yes.
natural gas, they could choose that. If they were to choose to not
All
have natural
electric,
gas,
they can still
they
choose
would
that.
still be able to choose that. So this is in no way restricting a private developer's gas of choice or
Yes.
energy source of choice. I should say.
Yes, that is correct, Senator. The bill applies to cities and counties and those public bodies deciding that they would not allow natural gas. That's correct.
Thank you.
Senator Cavanaugh.
I'll ask another one. Thank you, Chairman Bossman. Thanks again. Okay, so it would just prevent an outright ban. It wouldn't prevent a city or county or municipality from saying, we want to achieve some kind of goal. We want more energy efficiency. We want to encourage energy efficiency in our codes and our developments. They just couldn't, they could still do that. They just couldn't explicitly say, and they can't have gas.
The language in the bill, Senator, would restrict and prohibit a city or county from outright banning natural gas, but it would also prohibit them from acting in a way that, by the language in the bill, enacts or implements any ordinance, code, resolution, rule, regulation, or policy that restricts, prohibits, or has the effect of restricting natural gas. And the importance of that to us is that, yes, a city may say, well, we're not going to outright ban natural gas, but perhaps the language of the ordinance makes it basically impossible for an entity to have natural gas in their home. This bill would prohibit the city from taking that action.
What's an example of that?
So if we had a city that would say, for example, I'm just going to go by the language here, no, I guess I should have had an example ready for you. If it's not an outright ban, but let's say that in order for an entity to have natural gas, there would be additional requirements that are so prohibitive that a homeowner couldn't meet them, or a builder could not build and meet those requirements. That's effectively banning natural gas.
So something like.
So it'd probably be helpful for me to find some language for you because, like I said, that is what we are seeing. It might not be an outright ban, but the ordinance itself has the effect of essentially banning natural gas.
So I'm just thinking off the top of my head, things like Energy Star appliances or something like that with a certain rating. I mean, I don't know this or not, but is natural gas part of that rating system?
We are, because there are high efficiency natural gas appliances. So the Energy Star program itself does not preclude natural gas appliances.
Thank you.
So I thought there was something has been something in the news media, whatever, where there are some cities that are actually saying you cannot install new, or I don't even know, I thought it was even existing natural gas, you had to remove it. So you're saying that's not necessarily.
I didn't want to say for certain whether they are requiring it to be pulled out. But yes, they are absolutely banning natural gas in new construction. That portion is absolutely true.
Okay.
I'm just not certain whether any of them, as part of their ordinances, also require homes to be retrofitted and have the natural gas portion removed. That's what I'm not certain about.
Okay. All right. See no other questions?
Thank
Thanks for your
you.
testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent for LB 636.
Good afternoon.
Chair Bostelman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Brent Smoyer, Brent Smoyer, and I appear before you today as registered lobbyist on behalf of Northwestern Energy, a natural gas company serving Alda, Grand Island, Kearney, and North Platte. We thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today in support of LB 636, which would maintain energy choices for Nebraska consumers. As technology and innovation bring changes in the energy sector, businesses have new opportunities to lower their energy costs and reduce their carbon footprints. At the same time, we are concerned about the unintended consequences of local ordinances that would eliminate energy choice. Clean, reliable, and affordable energy is of particular importance, to all Nebraskans, as well as their businesses, their manufacturing plants, their restaurants. And it's important that we act now. I think as previously been stated with the last testifier and some of the questioning, it's important that we act so energy providers can continue plans for innovation and expansion in Nebraska communities without fear of those projects being rendered moot by government action. As we've seen with the federal government, push states and localities to voluntarily restrict the use of various energy sources. It's not difficult to imagine, especially given the last 3 years or so, of a time when an encouraged practice might become a mandated practice. Even if these practices don't result directly in mandates, we have only to look so far as a very recent dust-up over gas stoves under the U.S. Safety Commission that happened just weeks ago. While a ban did not come down from that agency, it's given local governments reasons to ponder and potentially act. Cities from coast to coast have made moves in the direction of stove bans and bans on use of gas in new construction. And to Senator Cavanaugh's question, while I don't have the exact ordinance language with me, I could certainly help Jill grab that. The articles I did read, and pardon my use of vulgarity here, but Los Angeles, New York, and Seattle all had such bans on new construction or remodels. As far as removal, I could not say that for sure. I do know there was, at least in LA, talk of a sort of carbon tax if you were to keep your gas stove. I don't know if that necessarily went anywhere per se, but again, I could find those articles and forward them on to you as well. While 636 itself is not a gas stove bill strictly, the principle about how ideas both trickle down and expand outward, sometimes sliding down a very, very slippery slope, remains the same. This is why this bill at this time is necessary to get out in front of the problem before it gets too big to push back on and we cannot put the genie back in the bottle. We believe state level policies are necessary to balance the energy requirements of all consumers with a desire to reduce our carbon footprint and remain competitive in growing our state's economy. Ultimately, the right to choose an energy source should remain with the consumer, and we'd urge you to advance LB 636. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent of LB 636. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I'm not used to being usually general affairs, so thank you for moving to 1510.
There you go.
I feel at home. Lynn McNally, Lynne McNally, appearing on behalf of the Nebraska Propane Gas Association. We are included in this bill. This would cover us if it became law. And we really strongly feel that energy choice should be the consumer's choice in Nebraska and not the choice of others, especially government. As was stated before, this is not forcing anyone to use any particular energy. It's just allowing people to use the energy they would like to use. If a builder wants to go all electric, they are totally free to do that. They just can't be prohibited from offering propane or natural gas if that's what they choose to utilize. This is part of the, we haven't been so much a part of it here because, we're the only public power state in the nation. But this really has originated from private electric companies in other states. They call it electrify everything. And trust me, I am the biggest user of electricity you're going to meet. I get weird when my phone goes below 20%, but I also want to be able to use propane if I want to. I want to be able to use natural gas if I want to. I love my natural gas stove. I will pay the tax to keep it. So it's just a matter of the government not being able to tell me that I can't use it. That's what it comes down to. So we would respectfully encourage you to advance this out of committee onto the floor.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions from committee members?
Thank
Seeing
you.
none, thank you. Next proponent, LB 636. Afternoon.
Good afternoon, Chairman Bosselman and members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Andrew Dunkley, ANDREW, I'm with the Nebraska Farm Bureau, and today I'm testifying on behalf of the Nebraska Soybean Association, Nebraska Pork Producers, Nebraska Wheat Growers, Nebraska State Dairy Association, and Renewable Fuels Nebraska as well. I testified on this bill last year, and in that testimony, I brought up, and I know that it was in front of another committee last year, but I brought up that I had been part of this issue since 2019. In my previous employment, I've been following this for a while. In 2019, only the city of Berkeley was proposing that natural gas was banned in new build homes. Since then, 7 states have either enacted bans on natural gas in new build homes or are considering it. It's California, Oregon, Washington, Colorado, New York, Vermont, Massachusetts are either considering or have enacted it. I believe Eugene, Oregon just recently did that, and 50 cities in California have enacted bans. And since last year, again, the federal government has come out with a plan which they immediately reneged on regarding gas stoves. So I brought it up as a very dangerous issue. It's very dangerous for agriculture because our agricultural producers rely on natural gas and other forms of energy in whatever works best for them. But I used an example of being in a neighbor's calving shed that was heated by a natural gas heater, and the power was out, and it was I believe it was 15 degrees, and I thought, boy, that natural gas heater is imperative, and agriculture really relies on that. And I want to impress the importance of this bill because things like this could happen here. I know I had spoken to a city councilman for the city of Lincoln who let me know that there are current proposals now in Lincoln to enact such a measure. Not sure where that stands or not, but I wanted to let you know. Neighboring states have enacted protections, the similar bills like this. In Wyoming, Kansas, Missouri, and Iowa have all enacted protections. And Senator Hughes, I believe you brought up who is supporting this, what they call the electrification movement. It's a wide array of organizations. The ones that I was familiar with, this is in the state of Colorado. This was Sierra Club and 350.org, which have various organizations that they work with and other funders. But there are many others as well. I'm going to stop right there and be open to any questions, but with the caveat that ag producers really rely on the reliability and affordability of their energy, and as long as it comes from diverse sources, we're open to any and everything from solar panels to natural gas. So,
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Senator Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Bosselman. Thank you, Mr. Buckley, for being here today. So I'm kind of curious. So you mentioned a number of cities who have moved forward with this type of legislation, or why might a city do that?
Well, I can't make their argument for them. I think there's this is my opinion at this point, but a lot of the types of activism that I've seen around this has the goal to end oil and natural gas production in the United States.
And then my other question was, because my only concern with this is that it seems to sort of stunt local control a bit, right? So I know you mentioned, for example, agriculture might rely a lot on natural gas. My understanding is that if that in fact is the case, I think it would be in the best interest of that local government to maintain access to natural gas. Would that not be the case, or?
I believe local control but consumer choice within within that is the effort of this bill, where you asked the question earlier of could there be a development that is, let's say a developer comes in and says we want everything's electric.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's go for it. I mean, that's a capitalist process where people, I think there would be a market for houses like that are not reliant on fossil fuels. It's probably a call for it, and I don't believe there's anything in the bill that would prohibit that. The reason that we support it is because not one thing works for everybody, and so a multitude of ideas is acceptable. We believe a multitude of energy sources is needed to support agriculture in Nebraska.
I think we agree on that. Yep. Thank you.
Sir Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Bossman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Dunkley. And I appreciate your perspective on this. I just wanted to ask about, you mentioned that whole thing about the stoves, and there was a plan to, I don't know, whatever, to do some of the stoves. Do you know where to find that? I haven't seen if there was actually a plan that was pulled back. I just heard there was a study, I guess.
Sure. I may have misspoke if I said it was a plan. It was I know that there are studies cited. I believe it was on the federal level, and I pay attention to the state side. I will get you an article.
If I misheard you, that's all right. I just wanted, because I haven't been able to find any plan. I've seen that there was this study that everybody has gotten all hot and bothered about, and
it was something that required a clear statement by the agency saying nope, we're not doing that, but it had been drafted.
Okay.
So yeah, I'll get that to you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
So no other questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next proponent for LB 636. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Chairman Botsman, members of the Natural Resources Committee. My name is Rich Otto, RICHOTTO, testifying in support of LB 636 on behalf of the Nebraska Hospitality Association, the Nebraska Retail Federation, and the Nebraska Grocery Industry Association. Thank you to Senator Albrecht for introducing this legislation. We see it as a common sense approach to maintain energy choices for Nebraska consumers and businesses. I know the previous testifiers went over energy choices and all of those. I will cut basically to our main reasons of support, and those are for our members that are preparing food, chefs, kitchens. Gas is the preferred method for all of those chefs. If you look at surveys, it's somewhere between 75 and 80% of chefs prefer cooking on gas. And we can go into those reasons. Those professionals prefer cooking on gas because it's heated up much quicker than electric cooktops. Gas offers greater control over temperature, usability with all cookware, not just flat bottom cookware, which typically is all you can use on an electric range. And then they're much simpler to clean and maintain as well for our restaurant members and those with kitchens in their facilities. Our members now are cooking with gas, and we want to keep cooking with gas going forward. That's the main reason for our support, but we do appreciate this approach. Also, just my take on your question, Senator Brand, is usually our restaurant members with kitchens have electric or gas piped in. Those other sources typically feed the electric grid, so it's one of those two choices. And so that's why we want to maintain that. Just one other point, that mobile units, or when we're at events or other things, electric can be very difficult to get to those, and we need to utilize either propane or natural gas. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you for your testimony. Questions from committee members? Sir Cavanaugh.
Yes, thank you, Chairman Bossman. Solid pun. But that's really all I wanted to say. But the other thing was, so I know, cooks love gas. Would your organization have any opposition if the bill was changed in such a way to only prohibit these ordinances that pertain to businesses and commercial development, and only it could allow for bans in the home?
Well, we're seeing more and more units that are getting certified kitchens in their homes. So that could be problematic. We do see where there's a shift a little bit where we have a lot of mobile units and other things where they'll have, maybe it'll be a building that they build on, but they are actually getting an expected kitchen in their home. And so they would still want to have that option. So that's my one concern with that. But
thank you.
Sir Frederickson.
Thank you, Chair Buckland. Not a question, it's a comment. I love cooking on gas myself, so I was wondering when the Culinary Institute was going to weigh in on this. So I appreciate that you came here and testified. That made me smile.
Oh, great. Appreciate that.
So the commercial stoves and homes kind of come back to home-based businesses, potentially home-based business, people that, I mean, there's people that.
Yeah, typically they're doing a full commercial.
I mean, we can now do, I mean, I think we passed legislation in the last couple of years where you can, someone can fix their food at home and then sell it.
Well, the cottage food, we did make some provisions in cottage food. Typically, those are non-perishable items. So when whether or not they qualify, but there are others that are getting the licensing beyond cottage food so that they actually are inspected and all of the other as well.
Okay, thank you. Next testifier and proponent for LB 636. Any other proponents? Seeing none, any opponents, LB 636, please come forward.
Good afternoon again, Senator Bossman, Al Davis, ALDAVIS, representing the 3,000 members of the Nebraska chapter of the Sierra Club. I'm going to kind of divert from my letter. You'll have that in your hands, but I think that the driving force behind this movement to make these restrictions is cities and towns who are very concerned about climate change and the ramifications of that. Every one of us here has experienced the ramifications of climate change, and it's on a day-by-day basis. And you've all heard that comment about the frog in the boiling water, starting out with room temperature and not knowing what was going on. And as the water gets warmer, the frog perishes because he isn't aware of what's going on. I think that's what's one of the problems that we have with our fuel, oil, and gas industry is, they have a profit center. They want to maximize that profit center. And really the costs that are associated with the oil and gas industry are not reflected in the climate change. So it's everything else that's bearing the cost of that. One of the things that bothers me about this bill is I really believe in local control as much as you can possibly have that. So if you've got villages or cities that want to put ordinances in that restrict gas, that's a decision that they make at their local level. And they have voters who they will be responsible to for that decision. So I've seen a lot of interest in this legislature in sort of stripping local governments of their powers. And I think, but every one of you probably ran on the basis of local control. This is a local control issue. You did hear references to Eugene, Oregon, and they just did pass that just the other day. It's for new construction only. One other comment I was just going to make. Some of you are old enough to remember the ugly 70s, and I lived in Denver at the time I was in college at that time. And so there was a brown cloud that circled over the city of Denver a lot of times because there were these inversions, and the city had to impose something that was very controversial at the time, but it was a wood burning fireplace ban in the city on specific days. And so we had a lot of the anger and frustration that you're hearing today about cities that are trying to impose these rules. But ultimately, that was for the good of the people in Colorado. It saved lives. A lot of people were getting sick from those clouds. You might know this, maybe you don't. Methane is really the bulk of what natural gas is. We call it natural gas, but it's largely methane. So I just was sitting listening to some of the testimony, and this, I did pull this up. Methane has 80 times the warming power of CO2. So we're putting methane into our air all the time from a number of different sources. When we flare a natural gas well, when we're cooking on a cook stove, which we have at our house, we have a propane stove. We all need to do as much as we can to combat global warming. It's for our interest and the children's interest and the future of the planet's interest, all the wildlife that lives here. I don't think that restrictions in an urban area by a village or a city that wants to implement that is harmful in any way. I understand it's harmful to the business, but the business isn't paying its share of what that low warming is doing to the planet. So we really believe strongly that this is up to the local EMT. Last thing I'll say is, how is this different really than a planned urban development that says you have to paint your house gray? How is it any different? Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony, Senator Hughes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Thanks for coming in now. You, if it's okay, you wear another hat and represent the Independent Cattlemen Association.
Yes.
With that hat on, how would they feel about this? Just with by nature of farming and the propane needing to keep things heated and electricity, you can't rely on 100% all that.
I'm sure that we've not discussed this issue. I reviewed the bills that I'm supposed to testify on with them. So we've not discussed that issue. I'm sure they would be concerned.
Okay, thank you.
But, I would say this, we're talking about new construction. And I can't imagine any city or any county in the state of Nebraska saying, strip out your gas lines, take away your propane stove, take away your propane furnace. You have to go with electricity.
But you could build new of a
If you build new, I don't
calving
think that's a
barn.
problem. True.
Okay.
Sir Cavanaugh.
Thank you, Chairman Wilson. Thank you for being here, Mr. Davis. I just wanted to ask you one question. So you talked a little bit about, I guess, externalities, right? The outside cost to society as a whole of carbon-based fuels. Do you read this bill to include a prohibition that a city could require some sort of mitigation of that, like scrubbers or carbon capture? Or would they still be allowed to do something along those lines?
Well, I think that would be an option. But how do you do that if you've got a cook stove?
Well, I'm just asking if the bill would prevent a city from taking some sort of action to require offsets.
I see. I didn't understand your question.
Yeah.
I don't think it does. Do you?
It says restricts. I don't know. I guess you could view any restriction, including. It does. I'm not sure it limits it to reasonable restrictions. I guess you're technically not.
It's all in how you
You're
read
not
it.
allowed to ask me questions, though, Al.
So does the Sierra Club support the complete ban of use of natural gas?
No, I don't believe so, but it's above my pay grade. I'll have to get the answer for you on that.
So,
But they believe in the
new
same-
production. I'm curious.
I would say that the Sierra Club thinks that we should move as rapidly as we possibly can without major disruptions to our economy to a carbon-free society.
So that would include eventually moving away from natural gas, I would think.
Probably.
Yeah, okay, appreciate that. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you for your
Thank you.
testimony. Any other opponents to LB 636? Any other opponents? Seeing none, anyone would like to testify in neutral capacity? LB 636, please come forward.
Oh, it's a fun day.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. My name is Lash, L-A-S-H, Chaffin, C-H-A-F-F-I-N. I'm a staff member at the League of Nebraska Municipalities, and I'd like to testify make this very clear, in a neutral capacity on LB 636. Before I get into my testimony, I'd like to offer up my appreciation to Senator Albrecht's office and in particular Ms. Becker for their extreme patience and persistence in getting many, many drafts of bills under our noses over the last year and trying to satisfy some of the league's concerns in another bill, another iteration of this concept. And I guess the history of this is there was a bill, a similarly concept bill written much differently in the government committee. I think it was last year, might have been 2 years ago, but I believe it was last year. And the league vigorously and strongly opposed that bill. And Senator Albrecht can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think Senator Brewer actually turned off the light. And I believe I testified for close to 45 minutes in opposition to this bill. And we don't want to do that today. But so we had a lot of concerns over the concepts in this bill and the local control that we thought we would be ceding under the bill as drafted at that time. The current language, it's been lawyered up rather dramatically, and as long as the language stays as is, the league will be neutral on LB 636. If there are any deviations to the language, we'd like to look at them and probably would oppose LB 636. But the way it's drafted now, and I do appreciate the patience and persistence of the proponents and continuing to try to work with it and tell me I can't dodge them anymore. So so we would be opposed. And I guess just a couple of thoughts. And some of the fears in Nebraska of some of these things happening, everyone at this table has been around local governments. They're not going to happen. I mean, the Odell City Council and the Gresham City Council are not Berkeley. They're not in the business. They don't even view that as part of their role. An offhand remark by one city council member somewhere is not a movement. This is Nebraska. This is not Northern California. So I just don't think there's a lot of concern that cities or counties in Nebraska are going to start banning these type of things. As a matter of fact, if we had a position on natural gas, it would be to get more natural gas out there. There are large portions of Nebraska that don't have natural gas pipelines, including some very sizable cities by Nebraska standards. City of Valentine, there's no natural gas pipeline that runs to the city of Valentine. They don't have natural gas service. So if anything, the movement in Nebraska would be the opposite. It would be trying to get in more natural gas service. So I guess that said, I'll skip my 45 minutes of opposition and say that at this point, the league is neutral on this. And so if the committee does move forward with it, we would encourage you to at least move forward with this exact language.
Okay, thank you for your testimony. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Any other who would like to testify in the neutral capacity on LV 636? Any others testify in neutral capacity? Seeing none, Senator Albrecht, you're welcome to close.
Well, thank you to the committee for listening to the proponents and opponents. I will say I was not in that government committee with Senator Brewer. I believe I had this in front of revenue last year. That's what I'm thinking. But anyway, this bill is not in response to any action that a city or county has taken. And I'm sure that Black Hills Energy is who brought this bill to me, and their relationship with their partners is very important to them, and they don't seem to truly have any major issues. And this bill did come up for a few years before I ever had it. And that was well before there was a consideration of gas stoves for indoor pollutants that could cause childhood asthma. I think that was an article that's out there. We just Googled it. But I think it's very prudent that the companies are being intentional with the current reliable sources that we currently have. I certainly wouldn't want to see it go away on the farm. I'm happy to see Mr. Chapman has come to a neutral stance instead of against the bill adamantly in the past. But I do know that the Sarpy cities, there's I think 117,000 users in the Sarpy, the city mayors all got on board on this bill as well. So I think it is something that should move forward just to protect the interest of a company that's been in Nebraska for a long time. I do know in California, they, with their new bans that they have, if it's not, if the company could not actually or did not want to consider all electric, they do still have an option in portions of California. I don't think it's a full statewide ban. But the other thing I would say is that I just think that customers do have a right to choose, and we have to be able to have those options available to them. And banning something like this or just being proactive not to do something like that. One other thing I will say is that we have wind energy very strong in Northeast Nebraska. And we have it there because the Facebook people that went into Sarpy County, that's what they wanted for their energy. And so that's why we have lots of wind energy up in Northeast Nebraska. So people have choices. Some companies will come in and want certain things. And I think that we have to be open to all forms. So with that, I hope you'll advance it to the floor. And any questions? I'd be happy to try to find some answers for you.
Is there any other questions from committee members? There were 7 proponent letters, 8 opponent letters to the committee, and that will close our hearing on LB 636. Thank you all for coming today. Committee members, hold on for a minute.